Welcome to Module 3. Now that you have a research topic, it's time to understand existing research. And honestly, this is where most students get intimidated. The biggest mistake beginners make is trying to read everything. That's exhausting. Instead of reading every line, your job is to extract useful information quickly. You're not reading papers to memorize them. You're reading them to understand 4 simple things: what was studied, how it was studied, what was discovered, and what's still missing. And the good news is, almost every research paper follows the same basic structure: title, abstract, introduction, method, results, conclusion. Once you recognize this pattern, papers stop feeling random and confusing. Always start with the abstract. Think of it like a movie trailer. In just a few lines, it tells you the topic, the method, the findings, and the final conclusion. And while reading the abstract, don't get stuck on difficult vocabulary. Just ask simple questions. What is this paper about? Who was studied? What method was used? And what did the researchers discover? The answer will usually look something like this. Topic: social media and students. Method: survey. Finding: more screen time, reduced focus. That's it. You're extracting information, not trying to understand every single sentence. Next comes the method section. This tells you how the research was actually conducted. And this matters because later, you'll design your own research too. Now, don't panic if the method section looks technical. At your level, you only need to identify basic things. Was it a survey, an interview, an experiment? How many participants were involved? And how was the data collected? Then comes the results section. This is where the paper answers its main question. This is where you look for patterns, relationships, and key findings. And don't get intimidated by graphs and tables. You do not need to understand every chart perfectly. Just focus on the big picture. What increased? What decreased? What relationship was found? Finally, the conclusion. This section summarizes the entire paper. And this is also where researchers often mention limitations or ideas for future studies. And this is important because one of the best places to find research gaps is inside the conclusion. Whenever researchers say things like, "more studies are needed," or "this study had limitations," that usually means something is still missing. And that missing piece can become your research opportunity. Before we learn how to read papers, let's understand why they feel difficult in the first place. Most students assume that if they don't understand every sentence, they're doing something wrong. But that's not true. Even experienced researchers don't understand everything immediately. Research papers are not novels. They're tools. When beginners read papers, they often jump straight to level 3. That's a mistake. Researchers usually read in layers. First, understand the topic. Then, understand the main findings. Only after that do you dive into details. Think about watching a movie. You first understand the story, then the characters, then the smaller details. Research papers work the same way. Here's a simple technique used by many researchers. Before reading deeply, spend 5 minutes trying to answer 3 questions. What is the topic? What exactly was studied? What did they find? If you can answer those 3 questions, you've already understood the most important part of the paper. Everything else simply adds detail. Reading research is a lot like detective work. A detective doesn't collect every piece of information. They look for clues. Researchers do the same thing. When reading a paper, you're searching for clues that help answer your own research question. That's why different researchers can read the same paper and focus on completely different things. They're looking for different clues. A common beginner mistake is highlighting everything. If everything is highlighted, nothing stands out. Instead, highlight only 4 things: the research question, the method, the key findings, and the limitations. These 4 pieces of information are usually enough to build a strong literature review later. Another mistake students make is stopping every time they find a difficult word. Imagine reading a paper and finding 10 unfamiliar terms. If you stop each time, you'll lose the flow completely. Instead, keep reading. Try to understand the general idea first. Only look up important terms that appear repeatedly. Researchers often understand concepts before they understand every word, and that's perfectly normal. This is an important mindset shift. Textbooks explain established knowledge. Research papers explore unanswered questions. That's why papers sometimes seem uncertain. You may notice phrases like, results suggest, it may indicate, further research is needed. That's because research is about exploring possibilities, not memorizing facts. Many students think good literature reviews come from reading hundreds of papers. Not necessarily. A strong literature review comes from reading strategically. One well-understood paper is more valuable than 10 papers you barely remember. Focus on quality of understanding, not quantity of reading. Let's make this practical. After this lesson, find one research paper related to your topic. Then answer 3 questions. What was studied? How was it studied? What was found? If you can answer those 3 questions, you've successfully read your first research paper like a researcher, and that's a huge step forward. And finally, remember this. Nobody is born knowing how to read research papers. It's a skill, and like every skill, it improves with practice. The first paper may feel confusing. The 5th paper will feel easier. The 10th paper will feel familiar. So don't judge yourself based on one difficult paper. Judge yourself based on whether you're improving, because that's what real researchers do. So let's quickly recap. Start with the abstract, scan the method, focus on the findings, and read the conclusion carefully. That's how researchers read papers efficiently. Now that you know how to read research papers, the next step is organizing them properly. And that's where the literature matrix comes in.